Hello and welcome. My name is Christine Stenquist. I am the board chair for Unsheltered Utah. Joining me today in Unsheltered Utah studios is our executive director and president, Wendy Garvin. Thanks for joining me, Wendy.
Thanks for having me.
We want to share with our audience some things that are coming up. And for us as an organization and for our state, there's a lot of things happening in the unsheltered population. So I wanted to dive in a little bit with you to talk about the problems that we're up against, potential solutions, and what we're going to be asking you, our community, for help with. You ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Let's dive in. So can you start with just telling me a little bit about Unsheltered Utah? How did it start? What do you guys do? What do we do? Tell them, Wendy.
Well, Unsheltered Utah is a constantly evolving nonprofit, and we started it about 2.5 years ago. As COVID had first started, we recognized that the unsheltered population was getting forced out of all of the places that they were receiving services. And that included 7-Elevens where they could just get a cup of coffee or use the bathroom, and it included community centers, and many of the places that they had been depending on for years were closed to them. And in order to address that, we decided to start going on outreach. We went out and we found the places that they were camping, and we brought supplies along to try and make their lives easier. And over the past 2.5 years, we've learned more and more about what supplies they need, where they are currently being accepted, where they're still not allowed, and what we can do out of the back of a truck to help them out.
Yeah, and we have come a long way in those 2 years. It started out with just a few of us friends using our own cars with supplies that were donated through the community, through a lot of you guys who follow us on our social media and what we do. We realized, though, we weren't quite meeting the needs that were going on. And you started showing up at some policy conversations.
Yeah, I started joining the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness, which is a really wonderful group of service providers and city officials that are most impacted by homelessness. And they get together every month to discuss a variety of topics. And that gave me access to larger service providers that were providing housing, service providers that provided domestic violence resources. And we were able to bring the gaps in services to the attention of these providers, and they really do their very best within the resources that they have to address those needs. But what we also found is that some of those gaps are very large. We probably have 1,000 people living on the street on a regular basis right now, just in the Salt Lake City area.
Just to give people some context to that, where were we as far as the number count when we started 2.5 years ago? Because it was a significantly less number.
I think the first winter we were doing this, the estimate was about 150 people on the street. The second winter, which was last winter, we saw about 250 people on the street. And so the numbers that we're seeing actually living on the street in tents or RVs has just exploded in the last 6 months.
Oh, and what number can you take a guesstimate of where we're at on those?
I think just in the Salt Lake City area, we're close to 1,000 people living on the street out of tents or RVs, and an increasing number of families and people experiencing domestic violence are included in those numbers.
That is astronomical. It's a true crisis on our hands.
It is a crisis.
So a lot of our engagement was a little bit of activism. We were the activists kind of yelling and pushing back a bit because we're so alarmed by what we were seeing. But now we're sort of starting to shift. Like you mentioned, you started showing up at these policy meetings. You were invited by these larger providers and encouraged to come and listen and give some input. Since that's happened, and I would love for you to share a few of the providers' names, because I think a lot of our community don't know them. I mean, we had to go through this process to learn about the Road Home, about the VOA, and about the different organizations that are out there doing the best they can with the limited resources they have. Can you share with me, and if it's okay, where we're transitioning to? We've been boots on the ground, doing this very, raw kind of activism, no real donors consistently. We're just asking everywhere. Now we've had providers really appreciate our conversation, the dialogue we're bringing to the table. What has been asked of us?
Some of the providers reached out to us and asked us if we would run the upcoming winter overflow shelter that's opening in about 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. It's a big lift.
It is. It's quite a big change. The client base remains the same. The people we're working with are people who live on the street and then during the very worst of weather seek out shelter, particularly at night when there's storms and extreme cold.
And so they've asked Unsheltered Utah if we'd be willing to run the overflow shelter, correct? For the winter. And that will be for October all the way to April
Correct.
of next year, right? Some of the really challenging parts of our season. I mean, it's challenging, I think, for unsheltered population always, whether it's heat or the cold that we're trying to protect them from. But can you explain why this is extremely important and what we're trying to ask the community's help on?
So the overflow shelters are not a permanent solution, but because we're experiencing a temporary increase in unsheltered individuals, we need temporary solutions. We need places for them to go to survive the elements until we can get them into permanent housing. And I think that everybody involved is strongly on the side of permanent housing as the ultimate long-term solution, and we all work together to make that happen. But in the short term, we need to help people survive until that permanent housing is actually built, because currently we don't have enough housing in the Salt Lake County area to address the homelessness issues that we're seeing.
That's true. That's really true. So, and there's different types of models. I think it might be helpful for people to understand what types of solutions are out there, because we do with very, very basic needs. And then there's people that have a little bit of income. They can get into different types of housing. We have different types of partners out there. Can you kind of explain to the community what resources we have, where we're lacking, and what we're striving for?
So, homeless services in a nutshell, there are many different kinds of services because there is quite a bit of need. We deal with what we call HRCs, Homeless Resource Centers. Those are places where people can get 24/7 housing. They get a bed that is assigned to them, and they get a case manager that helps them get into housing. This was the only model available for quite some time. And through the research that other providers have done, they've found a model where resource centers with 200 to 250 people are the most the best service that we can provide to people, because it gives everybody a chance to get the attention they need, the case management they need, and transition to that permanent housing. The next type of resource that we see are places like Catholic Community Center and the Wiegand Center, and these are walk-in services. They're open during the day, and they are not places for people to stay. They're places to access your caseworker, maybe plug your phone in and get it charged. You can access legal services on certain days, and it is a very needed service, particularly in inclement weather, because you can get into air conditioning or you can get into a heated space, but there's no beds, there's only chairs. It's a place that you can come in and take respite from the weather, but it is not housing. And then the overflows are perhaps a combination of those two things. They are temporary services where people can go and get out of the very worst of the weather. This year they're going to be open from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and they are not permanently assigned beds. It's first come, first serve for each evening as people show up. So there's no way to reserve a bed there, but anybody who shows up gets a bed until we're full. And that is a place to sleep at night and get out of the very worst of the weather. It's currently not available 365 days a year. We only open up winter overflow shelters. But part of the conversations that we're having are that as our summers are getting hotter, people need climate-controlled buildings in the heat of the summer as well. So we're hopeful in the future that we'll see these overflow shelters actually be permanent fixtures in our community to address the people with the most instability.
Oh, yeah. I know that our organization has sat around and dreamed about what we could have for our unsheltered population. Is part of this fundraising working towards that, what you're discussing, at an all year round situation, something that really does serve the community? Because we're spending a lot of money on temporary shelters. And maybe we should explain to the population what that means. We're taking buildings that were used for other things, spending a tremendous amount of funds, maybe not a lot, but funds to alter it enough so that they can be usable. But it seems like a lot of wasted taxpayer funds to do that when a more permanent housing situation makes sense, right?
I think that it's pretty well understood within the homeless services community that these temporary overflows are not the ideal situation. They are a response to this crisis in an increase in numbers that we've seen since the COVID pandemic hit. And we have many goals within homeless services. Our first and most basic goal is to help people survive from day to day. But that is not a permanent goal, because the best case scenario, that only helps people stay in homelessness and living outside. So our ideal long-term solution is to provide housing. And it is true, these temporary shelters are expensive. Every time you open a building and provide the changes that the building needs and turn on wireless services and electricity, and all of it costs money, including hiring staff and training staff. If you close it again 6 months later, it's not only not a particularly appealing job for the staff, it's not a permanent solution for our clients. So long term, we definitely hope to be providing services 365 days a year and be able to provide housing vouchers to get people into housing services that are going to be a more permanent solution. But we can't ignore the need to keep people alive until that housing is built, because currently it's just not available.
Well, I agree with all this. Let me ask you this, and I don't know how, into the weeds we want to get. Can we identify what the problem is? We have such a high, a lot of people have their speculations, and I'm wanting to try to, the part of the reasons why we did Unsheltered Utah was to help raise awareness on the issue, but also then to educate as to why people become homeless and what is involved in that, because there's a lot of misnomers, I think.
I can share a story of a family that is currently homeless and living out of an RV. They were in an apartment complex just a few months ago, and due to the inflation, due to the economic instability that we as a nation are experiencing already and that is affecting everyone, the apartment complex raised the rates. This particular apartment complex is well known for providing substandard living conditions. There are regular reports of roaches and mold and all sorts of really terrible things that are very unhealthy for our clients. And whenever anybody complains, they just get kicked out. So this family was trying to achieve a slightly better standard of living, and by that I mean a healthy place to raise their children. And so they had made some complaints about the mold that they were experiencing. And suddenly their rates were raised. They could not meet the increased rate, and so they ended up moving into an RV. They're living on the streets right around where that apartment complex was, because that's where their business is based out of, that's where their kids go to school, and they're trying to maintain as much stability as they can for these children. There are many stereotypes about the homeless community, and it's not so much that those stereotypes are wrong as they're just simply incomplete. We have people like this family who are struggling to get by. They run a landscaping business, so they never make tons of money, but they do make enough to get by until the rates really started to increase rapidly for them. And so the most consistent thing that we find from people experiencing homelessness is economic instability. There is no other factor that is as conclusively driving people to homelessness as simply the rising rates of housing. The next thing that we see that's very common is disability. As with so many other services in our country, people with disabilities end up homeless faster than the rest of the population. That does not mean that the rest of us might not follow in that path, because most people in America can only survive 2 paychecks, the loss of 2 paychecks before they become homeless. And that's a pretty frightening statistic. And it is what we see very frequently. People who thought, like you and I, that could just never happen to us. In fact, it can happen to anybody, and it can happen pretty quickly. So we do see mental disabilities as well as physical disabilities on the street. And anytime anybody has one strike against them, for lack of a better word, it is that much harder. If you are if you are living out of a wheelchair, it takes you longer to do everything, and that includes getting to work. It includes getting to the grocery store. It includes every chore that you have on a day-to-day basis. If you make that just a little bit harder, people who are living in wheelchairs start to fail more rapidly than the rest of the population. And it's just simply because what they're facing is so much harder. That doesn't mean that there are not some amazing people with disabilities who overcome every challenge that's thrown at them, but it's not realistic to expect that everybody in a wheelchair, everybody with a disability, can face those same challenges in exactly the same way.
Or is even resourced the same way. I think that's what a lot of people miss is a component here, is a lot of our clients aren't resourced the same way others. And when I say resourced, I mean either have strong family members or a strong community tie that provides a bit of that safety net. So we do see people who kind of get slipped through those cracks. So the solution really is to look at something more permanent, and in the meantime, take care of the immediate needs. So we are looking at, fundraising for the overflow.
Yes.
We got a little bit of funding from the state. We are still looking for more funding, and that's a bit of the reasons why we are coming to our community and our followers, our supporters, the public who are just concerned about being decent human beings, how they can get involved, how can they help. And this is a way to do that. Help the immediate need by helping with the overflow, which we're doing right now, and help us create a better future for the unsheltered population in a more permanent solution where we're looking at a full-on year-round shelter. So I think to just kind of summarize and sew this up, where should people go if they're wanting to donate to Unsheltered Utah in our current project?
Unshelteredutah.org is our website, and there is a big donate button on every single page. So
every single page
should be pretty easy to find a way to donate. And that money will go directly towards services for our clients or providing staff so that we can stay open and provide these resources that they need. We have worked on an all-volunteer basis for 2.5 years, so I promise you we know how to pinch pennies really, really effectively. And everything that we can find to assist our clients, we try and send right back into that community so that they can get the help that they need. What we are trying to do as we staff up for this overflow shelter, we're finding all of these amazingly talented individuals who have often volunteered for us or our sister organizations over the last few years. And we don't want to lose them. What we want is, when the overflow is ready to close on April 15th, we want our next project ready to be up and running. And to do that, we need some funds. We need to be able to pay staff and run payroll and make sure that our operation stays up and running so we don't lose all of these talented people. That is our biggest goal, is to fundraise enough that we have enough of a buffer of money so that however long it takes the state to come back and pay us for our contracts or grant money to come in, we have that buffer to keep our organization up and running and make sure that our consistent services are available to our clients.
Yeah. So guys, we're always looking for partners. We're looking for large corporations. We're looking for angel donors who are really interested in helping make a difference in our community. 1,000 people homeless is an astronomical number, and we don't see the housing crisis improving anytime soon. We still have inflation going on all goods and all services. This is really a crunch time, and it's a time that we need the community to come together and really help us address this crisis. It's not just for the state to do, it's not just for the cities to do. We saw the lacking there, we stepped up and say, we are part of this community. We are going to lend a helping hand. And that's what we're asking you guys to do as well. So please go to our website, learn a little more about Unsheltered Utah, our fantastic ED. We have a couple of other board members who have been just amazing in helping get the word out. Lonnie and Nate have been amazing. We have incredible volunteers who have been consistent volunteers, new volunteers. We're always looking for more community input. So again, unshelteredutah.org. We will look forward to seeing you guys. We hope to see a lot of donations come in. Any parting words, Wendy?
Thank you for everything that you have done for us as we've gotten started. We could not have created this amazing organization without our volunteers, without our donors, without our consistent folks who drop $50 every single month. We see you, we appreciate you, we have spent that money so very carefully, and we will continue to do so because we believe these services are life-saving and critical.